National Electrical Code Article 230.95 addresses overcurrent protection location, specifically subsection A, accessible. It states that overcurrent protective devices shall be readily accessible without removing any portion of the building or equipment other than the overcurrent protective device cover. A distance of more than 6 feet, equivalent to 1.8 meters, from the floor or working platform shall be considered not readily accessible. There is an exception, however. Overcurrent protective device is not intended to be operated except for infrequent maintenance, and servicing shall be permitted out of reach if suitable auxiliary means of interrupting the circuit are provided for maintenance and servicing. Article 240.24 covers the location of service equipment. Subsection A covers unrestricted access. Service equipment shall be installed in a readily accessible location, either outdoors or indoors, where the equipment will not be subject to physical damage, excessive moisture, or temperature extremes. Subsection B is on accessibility. Service equipment shall be accessible to qualified personnel without jeopardizing their safety. These code sections require that overcurrent protective devices, which include the main service disconnect and service equipment, such as the main electrical panel, are readily accessible to qualified personnel for maintenance, servicing, and emergencies. Therefore, a location within a rented apartment does not typically meet this requirement, as the tenant can potentially lock out access. The National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA 70E, which is the standard for electrical safety in the workplace, emphasizes the importance of readily accessible electrical equipment for safety and emergency response. Local building codes may have additional requirements for the location and accessibility of main electrical service equipment. It is recommended that the main service entrance disconnect should be relocated to a readily accessible location, such as a locked closet or utility room. The tenant should be made aware of the location of the main service disconnect and the importance of keeping it accessible in case of emergencies. Now let us delve into a more detailed explanation of these code sections. Considering that service equipment must be readily accessible means that it should be located so that qualified personnel can reach it quickly and easily without having to overcome obstacles such as locked doors, stacked materials, or excessive heights. The intent is to ensure that in the event of an emergency, such as a fire or electrical fault, qualified individuals can quickly disconnect the power to the building to prevent further damage or injury. The NEC defines readily accessible as being capable of being reached quickly for operation, renewal, or inspections without requiring those to whom ready access is requisite to climb over or remove obstacles or to resort to portable ladders, and so on. This definition highlights the importance of having clear and unobstructed access to service equipment. Article 230.95 focuses on the location of overcurrent protection devices, which are essential for protecting electrical systems from overloads and short circuits. The requirement that these devices be readily accessible ensures that they can be easily reset or replaced in the event of a fault. The exception to this rule allows for overcurrent protective devices to be located out of reach if they are not intended to be operated except for infrequent maintenance and servicing, and if suitable auxiliary means of interrupting the circuit are provided. This exception might apply to certain industrial or commercial settings where the main disconnect is located in a secure area and is only accessed by authorized personnel. However, in a residential setting such as an apartment building, the main service disconnect should generally be readily accessible to qualified personnel for safety reasons. Article 240.24 further reinforces the requirement for readily accessible service equipment. This section specifies that service equipment must be installed in a location that is both readily accessible and protected from physical damage, excessive moisture, and temperature extremes. The intent is to ensure that the equipment is not only easily accessible but also protected from environmental factors that could compromise its performance or safety. The requirement that service equipment be accessible to qualified personnel without jeopardizing their safety underscores the importance of providing a safe working environment for electricians and other qualified individuals who may need to access the equipment for maintenance or repairs. This includes ensuring that there is adequate lighting, ventilation, and working space around the equipment, as well as providing appropriate personal protective equipment. The NFPA 70E standard provides detailed guidance on electrical safety in the workplace, including requirements for working on or near energized electrical equipment. This standard emphasizes the importance of hazard assessment, training, and the use of appropriate safety procedures and equipment to prevent electrical injuries and fatalities. In the context of service equipment accessibility, NFPA 70E highlights the need for qualified personnel to be able to quickly and safely disconnect power to the equipment in the event of an emergency. In addition to the NEC and NFPA 70E, local building codes may also have specific requirements for the location and accessibility of main electrical service equipment. These codes may vary depending on the jurisdiction and may reflect local conditions or concerns. Therefore, it is essential to consult with local building officials to ensure that the installation of service equipment complies with all applicable requirements. The recommendation to relocate the main service entrance disconnect to a readily accessible location such as a locked closet or utility room reflects the intent of the NEC and other relevant standards to ensure that service equipment is both accessible and secure. A locked closet or utility room provides a secure location that is accessible to qualified personnel while preventing unauthorized access by tenants or other individuals. The tenant should be made aware of the location of the main service disconnect and the importance of keeping it accessible in case of emergencies. This ensures that the tenant can quickly disconnect power to their apartment in the event of a fire or other emergency. Additionally, it is important to provide clear and conspicuous signage indicating the location of the main service disconnect and instructions on how to operate it. In summary, the NEC requires that service equipment be readily accessible to qualified personnel for maintenance, servicing, and emergencies. The location of a main service disconnect within a rented apartment typically does not meet this requirement, as the tenant can potentially lock out access. The NFPA 70E standard emphasizes the importance of readily accessible electrical equipment for safety and emergency response, and local built-in codes may have additional requirements for the location and accessibility of main electrical service equipment. It is recommended that the main service entrance disconnect should be relocated to a readily accessible location, such as a locked closet or utility room, and that the tenant should be made aware of the location of the main service disconnect and the importance of keeping it accessible in case of emergencies. Let us now consider some specific scenarios and examples to further illustrate the importance of service equipment accessibility. Imagine a situation where a fire breaks out in an apartment building. The fire department arrives on the scene and needs to quickly disconnect power to the building to prevent the fire from spreading and to protect the safety of firefighters and residents. If the main service disconnect is located within a locked apartment and the tenant is not available to provide access, the firefighters may be delayed in disconnecting the power, which could have serious consequences. In another scenario, an electrician is called to an apartment building to investigate a power outage. The electrician needs to access the main electrical panel to diagnose the problem and make repairs. If the panel is located within a locked apartment and the tenant is not available, the electrician may be unable to access the panel and restore power to the building. These scenarios highlight the importance of ensuring that service equipment is readily accessible to qualified personnel at all times. By relocating the main service disconnect to a readily accessible location, such as a locked closet or utility room, building owners can ensure that qualified personnel can quickly and safely access the equipment in the event of an emergency. In addition to the safety benefits, ensuring service equipment accessibility can also help to prevent costly delays and disruptions to service. By making it easier for qualified personnel to access the equipment for maintenance and repairs, building owners can minimize downtime and keep their tenants happy. It is also important to note that the requirements for service equipment accessibility apply not only to main service disconnects but also to other types of electrical equipment, such as transformers, generators, and emergency power systems. All of these types of equipment should be located in readily accessible locations and should be properly maintained to ensure their safe and reliable operation. In conclusion, the NEC requires that service equipment be readily accessible to qualified personnel for maintenance, servicing, and emergencies. The location of a main service disconnect within a rented apartment typically does not meet this requirement, as the tenant can potentially lock out access. The NFPA 70 standard emphasizes the importance of readily accessible electrical equipment for safety and emergency response, and local building codes may have additional requirements for the location and accessibility of main electrical service equipment. It is recommended that the main service entrance disconnect should be relocated to a readily accessible location such as a locked closet or utility room, and that the tenant should be made aware of the location of the main service disconnect and the importance of keeping it accessible in case of emergencies. To expand upon the recommendations, consider the following. Firstly, conduct a thorough review of the existing electrical system to identify any potential accessibility issues. This review should include an inspection of all service equipment, including main disconnects, electrical panels, transformers, generators, and emergency power systems. Secondly, develop a plan to address any accessibility issues that are identified. This plan should include specific steps for relocating equipment, improving access routes, and providing clear and conspicuous signage. Thirdly, consult with qualified electrical contractors and engineers to ensure that the plan complies with all applicable codes and standards. This consultation should include a review of the electrical drawings and specifications, as well as a site visit to assess the existing conditions. Fourthly, obtain all necessary permits and approvals before commencing any work. This may include permits from the local building department, as well as approvals from the utility company. Fifthly, schedule the work to minimize disruptions to tenants and building operations. This may involve working during off-peak hours or providing temporary power to affected areas. Sixthly, communicate with tenants and building staff to inform them of the planned work and any potential disruptions. This communication should include clear and concise information about the scope of the work, the schedule, and any safety precautions that need to be taken. Seventhly, conduct a final inspection to ensure that the work has been completed in accordance with the approved plan and all applicable codes and standards. This inspection should include a review of the electrical drawings and specifications, as well as a site visit to verify that all equipment is properly installed and accessible. Eighthly, maintain accurate records of all work performed, including permits, approvals, inspections, and test results. These records should be kept in a safe and accessible location and should be readily available for review by building owners, tenants, and regulatory agencies. Ninthly, provide ongoing training to building staff on the proper operation and maintenance of the electrical system. This training should include information on how to identify and respond to electrical emergencies, as well as how to maintain the accessibility of service equipment. Finally, regularly review and update the electrical system to ensure that it continues to meet the needs of the building and its occupants. This review should include an assessment of the existing equipment, as well as a consideration of any new technologies or standards that may be relevant. Let us further elaborate on some of the practical considerations involved in relocating a main service disconnect. One of the first steps is to determine the existing electrical load and to ensure that the new location can accommodate the required capacity. This may involve consulting with an electrical engineer to perform a load calculation and to determine the appropriate size of the disconnect and associated wiring. Another important consideration is the available space in the new location. The disconnect must be installed in a location that provides adequate working space for qualified personnel to safely access and maintain the equipment. This working space must comply with the requirements of the NEC, which specifies minimum clearances around electrical equipment. In addition to working space, the new location must also provide adequate ventilation to prevent overheating of the equipment. This may involve installing additional ventilation fans or louvers to ensure that the equipment operates within its specified temperature range. The wiring method used to connect the disconnect to the existing electrical system must also comply with the NEC. This may involve using conduit, cable, or other approved wiring methods, depending on the specific application and the requirements of the local building code. The disconnect must be properly grounded to ensure that it is protected from electrical faults. This grounding must comply with the requirements of the NEC, which specifies the size and type of grounding conductors that must be used. The disconnect must be clearly labeled to identify its function and the circuits that it controls. This labeling must comply with the requirements of the NEC, which specifies the information that must be included in the labels. The disconnect must be protected from physical damage. This may involve installing a protective enclosure or barrier to prevent accidental contact or damage from falling objects. The disconnect must be accessible to qualified personnel at all times. This may involve providing a key to the locked enclosure or providing a code to access the utility room. The location of the disconnect should be clearly marked on the building's electrical drawings and should be included in the building's emergency response plan. This information should be readily available to emergency responders and qualified personnel. In addition to the technical considerations, there are also some practical considerations to keep in mind when relocating a main service disconnect. Firstly, it is important to communicate with tenants and building staff to inform them of the planned work and any potential disruptions. This communication should include clear and concise information about the scope of the work, the schedule, and any safety precautions that need to be taken. Secondly, it is important to schedule the work to minimize disruptions to tenants and building operations. This may involve working during off-peak hours or providing temporary power to affected areas. Thirdly, it is important to take steps to protect the building's interior from damage during the work. This may involve using drop cloths, plastic sheeting, or other protective materials to prevent dust, dirt, and debris from spreading throughout the building. Finally, it is important to clean up the work area thoroughly after the work is completed. This may involve sweeping, vacuuming, or mopping to remove any remaining dust, dirt, or debris. By following these practical considerations, building owners can minimize the disruption caused by the relocation of a main service disconnect and can ensure that the work is completed safely and efficiently. Now let's consider the financial implications of relocating a main service disconnect. The cost of relocating a main service disconnect can vary depending on a number of factors, including the complexity of the electrical system, the distance that the disconnect needs to be moved, and the labor rates of the electrical contractors in the area. In general, the cost of relocating a main service disconnect can range from several $100s to several $1,000s. This cost can be broken down into several components, including the cost of materials, the cost of labor, and the cost of permits and fees. The cost of materials can include the cost of the disconnect itself, as well as the cost of wiring, conduit, fittings, and other electrical components. The costs of labor can include the cost of hiring qualified electrical contractors to perform the work, as well as the cost of any engineering or design services that may be required. The cost of permits and fees can include the cost of obtaining permits from the local building department, as well as the cost of any inspection fees that may be charged. In addition to the direct costs of relocating a main service disconnect, there may also be some indirect costs to consider. These indirect costs can include the cost of lost rent or revenue due to disruptions to building operations, as well as the cost of any damage to the building's interior that may occur during the work. To minimize the cost of relocating a main service disconnect, building owners should obtain multiple bids from qualified electrical contractors and should carefully review the bids to ensure that they include all of the necessary work and materials. Building owners should also consider obtaining any necessary permits and approvals in advance to avoid delays and additional costs. Furthermore, building owners should schedule the work to minimize disruptions to tenants and building operations. Finally, building owners should take steps to protect the building's interior from damage during the work and should clean up the work area thoroughly after the work is completed. By following these steps, building owners can minimize the cost of relocating a main service disconnect and can ensure that the work is completed safely and efficiently.